welcome to Life Stories. Sometimes a single breakdown can change the course of your entire life. Not the kind that leaves you stranded on the side of the road, though in this case, it did, but the kind that forces you to face what you've been running from. This is a story about a young woman on the edge of losing everything, and an old mechanic who has already lost more than he'll ever say out loud. It's about small-town battles where the stakes aren't just property lines, they're pride, legacy, and the quiet promises we make to ourselves. In the space between rusted tools and blooming gardens, they'll discover that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds are impossible. And sometimes the person you least expect becomes the one who saves you in ways you never imagined. Now, let me take you back to the day it all began. Maya Thompson's van coughed, rattled, and then died with a hollow gasp, leaving her stranded on Route 46 under a sky streaked with the pale gold of early evening. She gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles whitened, staring at the dash as if willpower alone could bring the engine back to life. It was the third breakdown this month, and every time felt like another crack in the fragile shell of her struggling landscaping business. Without the van, she couldn't haul soil, couldn't deliver plants, couldn't even get to the handful of jobs keeping her afloat. Winter was coming, and with it the steady whisper of unpaid bills turning into demands. Her father, gone 2 years now, had warned her. That transmission'll quit when you least expect it, kid, and fixing it'll cost more than the van's worth. Back then she'd laughed, trying to mask the fear in his voice with a joke. Now, alone on an empty road, his words rang like prophecy. She checked her phone. No signal. Just the silent outline of the forest pressing in, the wind brushing through pine needles like it had something to say but wouldn't speak. Somewhere behind her memory, she pictured the old garage she'd passed a few miles back. A weathered blue building with a flickering sign, Hank's Auto Repair, and a scattering of cars in various states of mechanical purgatory. It wasn't the kind of place with glossy service bays and cappuccino machines in the waiting area. It was the kind of place her father would have approved of. The kind of place where the air smelled of grease and old coffee, and the man behind the counter could fix an engine just by listening to it. She locked the van, shoved her wallet and phone into her jacket pocket, and started walking. The September sun clung stubbornly to the horizon, burning her shoulders as she trudged along the shoulder, boots crunching on gravel. Cars sped past, their drivers avoiding her gaze, because in this world people didn't stop for strangers, especially not for a woman in mud-stained work pants and a ponytail fraying into wild auburn waves. By the time the garage appeared, her feet ached and her patience had worn thin. The place looked exactly as she remembered: peeling paint, a sign sun-bleached to near illegibility, tools scattered outside like forgotten relics. The door gave a protesting creak as she stepped inside. Dim light, concrete floors, the sharp tang of oil and metal. Somewhere in the back, the rhythmic clang of metal on metal, followed by a low curse. "Hello?" she called. The clanging stopped. From behind a lifted pickup, a man emerged, broad-shouldered, weathered skin, steel gray hair under a grease-smudged cap. His blue work shirt bore the stitched name Hank, and his eyes, the color of storm clouds, narrowed as they landed on her. "Problem?" he asked, voice flat as cold iron. "My van's dead," she said, forcing her shoulders straight. 3 miles east. It won't start at all." Hank grunted, grabbed a rag, and wiped his hands without looking at her. "Tow truck's out on another call. Be hours before it's back." The words hit her like a closed door. "I really need to get to a job in Milltown today," she said, and hated how desperate she sounded. "Important?" His gaze lingered on her, and something flickered there. Not sympathy, but maybe a calculation. "Could be a dozen things wrong," he said finally. "I'll drive out. Take a look. No promises." 10 minutes later, she sat in the passenger seat of his tow truck, a steel beast older than she was, listening to a classic rock station loud enough to make conversation unnecessary. She stared out the window, counting the stakes in her mind. If she missed this job, she'd lose a client who'd promised steady work through the season. Without it, November's rent would be a coin toss she'd likely lose. The road blurred past, and for a moment she considered how easily everything could crumble. At the van, Hank went to work, moving with the deliberate precision of a surgeon. He diagnosed a dead battery in a parasitic drain that had likely been bleeding it for weeks. She asked if he could just jump it, just enough to get her to the job. He shook his head. "You'd end up stranded somewhere else. Tow it back." She bit down on the urge to scream. Back at the garage, Hank tested, muttered, and finally delivered the verdict. New battery, alternator, and wiring work, more than she'd earned in 2 weeks. Her voice felt small as she asked for the total. He named it. It hurt, but not as much as the truth pressing in. She was out of margin. And then something unexpected happened. Hank leaned against the van, arms crossed, studying her face. "Ain't my business," he said, "but you look like you're carrying too much." She wasn't used to anyone seeing past the armor. "Everything's falling apart," she admitted, and hated how her voice cracked. He nodded once, slow. "Can't fix it all at once. Start with the basics." She almost laughed. It was too simple, but something in her recognized the truth. "What are the basics?" "First," he said, a hint of a smile ghosting his lips, "we get you a new battery. Then we see what else she's got left." For 2 hours, she became his reluctant apprentice, fetching tools, holding flashlights, feeling the strange relief of focusing only on the task at hand. Somewhere between swapping the battery and coaxing the engine to life, the garage stopped feeling like just another stop on a bad day. And when he slid the bill across the counter, lower than she'd feared, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't in months: hope. But as she turned to leave, she caught him watching her, not with suspicion, but with something closer to recognition. And she couldn't shake the sense that this gruff mechanic in his fading garage held a story she didn't yet understand. Later that night, as she drove her van toward the city lights, a black luxury sedan passed her, going the other way. She didn't notice the man in the driver's seat, his sharp eyes catching the glow of her headlights. She didn't know his name yet, or the way he would soon twist both her life and Hank's into knots. All she knew was the engine's hum beneath her hands, and that for the first time in months, she wasn't sure if she was running away from something or toward it. What would you risk to protect the last piece of your father's legacy? Could you trust a stranger whose help might cost you more than failure? The headlights faded into the night behind her, but their shadow would follow her straight into Hank's world, and the fight neither of them saw coming. The next afternoon, Maya pulled into Hank's lot with a thermos of strong black coffee, the kind that could melt rust, telling herself it was just to say thank you. But the truth was she wanted to see if yesterday's unexpected connection had been real or just a byproduct of exhaustion and relief. The garage door was open, classic rock humming faintly from an old radio, and Hank was under the hood of a battered Chevy, sleeves rolled up, forearms corded with muscle and grime. "Brought you something," she said, holding out the thermos. He eyed it suspiciously, then took it without a word, sipping like a man testing for poison. "Not bad," he admitted. That was the closest thing to praise she figured she'd get. She stayed, half watching him work, half thinking about how strange it felt to be here again. That's when a low purr of an engine cut through the music. A sleek black sedan rolled in, its paint reflecting the pale autumn sun like a blade. The driver stepped out, tall, immaculate suit, smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Brandon Carter," he said, offering a hand Hank didn't take. "I've been meaning to stop by." Maya felt the shift in the air, the kind of subtle tightening that precedes a storm. Carter's gaze slid to her, appraising, dismissive, before settling back on Hank. "This property sits on prime real estate. Highway expansion next year will double traffic. I can make you an offer that would let you retire somewhere warm, maybe Florida. No more cold winters in a drafty garage." "Not for sale," Hank said, each word clipped. Carter's smile didn't falter. "Everything's for sale at the right price." He named a number that made Maya's stomach jolt. It was enough to erase every one of her debts and still start over twice. For a heartbeat, Hank didn't move. Then he shook his head. "My dad built this place, taught me everything I know right here. I'm not selling so you can pave it over for another soulless showroom." Brandon's smile hardened. "That's a shame, But don't be surprised if the county starts paying closer attention to a building this old. Codes change. You might find the cost of staying open rising. The threat was thinly veiled, but coldly real. As his sedan purred away, Maya turned to Hank. What did he mean by that? He didn't answer, just stared at the spot where Carter's car had been. The following week proved Carter hadn't been bluffing. Hank arrived one morning to find a bright orange notice stapled to the front door. Multiple code violations, immediate closure until repairs were made, improper chemical storage, electrical hazards, structural concerns. It was a laundry list designed to bury them. Inside, the garage felt different, like someone had stolen its air. Hank moved slowly, reading through the violations, jaw tight. Some of these are legit, he admitted. Most are crap. Maya's pulse hammered. This is Carter. He's using the county to force you out. Wouldn't be the first time a man with money pulled strings, Hank muttered. But fixing all this more than I can handle. She wanted to say they'd figure it out, but part of her, a part she hated, whispered that maybe selling would be easier. She had her own business to save. Her own bills stacked like silent threats in her apartment. If Hank sold, she could walk away, owing him nothing. But as she looked at him standing there in the shadow of his father's life's work, she realized it wasn't just a building. It was a promise he'd kept for decades, and Carter was asking him to betray it. That night, she couldn't sleep. The numbers in her bank account clashed with the stubbornness in her chest. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, not about Vans this time, but about the kind of person she wanted to be. By morning, her decision was made. She returned to the garage with a notebook full of sketches, a reimagined Hank's auto repair, part traditional garage, part greenhouse and nursery for her landscaping business, all housed right here. Shared space, shared customers, a way to survive together. Hank studied the pages, expression unreadable. You're crazy, he said at last. Yeah, she answered, but maybe it's the kind of crazy that works. For a long moment, he just stared at her, and she wondered if she'd crossed a line. Then, to her shock, the corners of his mouth twitched upward. All right, kid, let's see if we can give Carter something he can't buy. If you were in Maya's place, would you fight for someone else's dream, even if it risked your own survival? Because just as they began to plan, Carter was already making his next move, and this time, he wasn't coming alone. The reimagining of Hank's auto repair began with long days and longer nights. Word spread quietly through the small Oregon town, and people started showing up. A retired electrician Hank had once helped for free rewired the back office. A local carpenter replaced warped shelving with solid oak. Farmers dropped off surplus lumber, nails, and even a used greenhouse frame. The lot behind the garage, once littered with rusted parts, transformed under Maya's direction into neat rows of soil beds and a skeletal greenhouse ready to bloom. Yet for every step forward, the shadow of Brandon Carter loomed larger. He drove past more often now, never stopping, always watching. The tension settled in Maya's bones, a constant reminder that this wasn't just about repairs and plants. It was a fight for something bigger than both of them. Then, 2 weeks before the grand reopening they dared to plan, a new notice appeared on the door. The garage would require an engineering certification of its roof trusses and western wall before operations could resume. It was a deliberate death sentence. Engineers booked months out, fees in the thousands. Hank read the notice in silence, his hands tightening into fists. He's trying to bleed us dry, Maya said, the words sharp in her mouth. And he might, Hank replied quietly. We can't afford to shut down that long. The air inside the garage felt heavier than the smell of oil and dust. Maya stepped outside and, almost without thinking, dialed the number on a business card she'd been carrying since the first round of violations, Commissioner Laura Fleming. She answered on the second ring. After hearing the situation, her voice lowered, deliberate. Leave it with me, she said. Check your email in an hour. When the email came, Maya's hands shook. Attached was the certification they needed, signed by the county's own engineering department. The structure was sound, fully compliant. Hank read it twice before looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before, relief edged with disbelief. Guess we're not done yet, he said. They reopened the next morning. Business trickled in at first, then more steadily as word spread that Hanks was back. Customers came for brake jobs and oil changes, then left with potted herbs or trays of seedlings. Maya found herself spending as much time explaining plant care as Hank did explaining carburetor rebuilds. It worked. The place hummed with the energy of something alive again. The confrontation, when it came, wasn't with Brandon Carter. It was with someone older, someone who moved with quiet authority. Richard Carter, Brandon's father. He arrived in a well-tailored suit, stepping out of a car that whispered money, but not arrogance. "I'm here to apologize for my son," he said, seated across from them in Hank's cramped office. "I've learned more than I care to about the lengths he's gone to in this venture. He's been reassigned out of state, permanently." Hank didn't smile, but his shoulders eased. Richard slid a folder across the desk. Inside was not another offer to buy the property, but a proposal for a new development plan. A highway green corridor featuring local businesses, with Hank's Auto and Maya's Nursery as anchor attractions. Funding for improvements, no strings attached. "It benefits my company," Richard said plainly, "but it also benefits you, and I think you've earned the right to grow on your own terms." They read every page. The terms were fair, more than fair, and for once, the deal didn't feel like a trap. By spring, the transformation was complete. The garage's soul was intact, grease-stained concrete, the clang of tools, the scent of oil. But now a greenhouse gleamed in the back, rows of flowers spilling into the yard like fireworks in slow motion. A custom van sat out front, painted with the words, "We fix more than just cars," equipped for roadside repairs and plant deliveries. On opening day, the lot was full. Neighbors, customers, old friends. Commissioner Fleming stood near the greenhouse, speaking with Richard Carter. Hank had even put on a clean shirt. Maya caught herself looking around, trying to freeze the moment in her mind. The hum of conversation, the rustle of leaves in the greenhouse, the faint twang of a guitar from Hank's radio inside. But the truest thing was this. She felt whole. She hadn't just saved her business, she'd found a place she belonged. As the day wound down, Hank stood beside her, watching the crowd thin. "Not bad," he said. "For a flower girl." She laughed, shaking her head. "For a grumpy old mechanic, you're not so bad yourself." A family approached, a father holding the hand of a little boy who clutched a toy tow truck. "This is the man who fixed Mommy's car," the father said. The boy's eyes widened at Hank like he was some kind of legend. Maya caught Hank's look then, brief, unguarded pride. They watched the boy leave, his tiny footsteps fading into the gravel, and for a heartbeat the whole fight, every sleepless night, every doubt, felt worth it. Life wouldn't be perfect. The bills would still come. Engines would still break down. Plants would still wilt in the wrong weather. But they had carved out something rare, a place where things could be fixed, whether they were made of steel, soil, or stubborn hope. And as the sun slipped behind the trees, Maya realized something her father might have told her. Sometimes the road you break down on is the only one that can take you home. What did you feel when you saw how this story ended? Comment 100 if you enjoyed it. Which country are you watching from? Share this video with your friends, and thank you for watching Life Stories.